Joining me now, senior writer for Sports Illustrated, Chris Mannix, who covers the NBA and, of course, the Boston Celtics pretty closely. And Chris, with Jayson Tatum dropping 50 last night against the Wizards, was that the only thing that could have essentially saved Boston in a situation like this where they were limping into the play-in?
I mean, more or less. The Celtics have had a rough season for a number of reasons, but it got exponentially rougher over the last couple of weeks when Jaylen Brown, the second All-Star in this group, went out of the lineup with a season-ending wrist injury. That put a lot of pressure on Jayson Tatum to perform offensively, and he stepped up to that challenge. Jayson Tatum, throughout the course of his career, has been an elite scorer. But over the last couple of years, he's really stepped up and shown he can be an elite playoff scorer. And while the play-in game doesn't necessarily count as a playoff game or count in terms of playoff statistics. In fact, nobody's actually sure where these play-in statistics go when it's all said and done. This was a clutch performance by Tatum that, you know, when his career is over, it'll be one of those things they look back on and as potentially defining.
Chris, Tatum only 23 years old and has performed really well in the playoffs so far. A lot of people, talking about him potentially catching Kobe Bryant in postseason performance, although I think that the divide is still pretty wide. Still, do you see him sooner rather than later being the MVP of the league?
Oh, Scott Brooks certainly thinks so. The head coach of the Wizards mentioned that after the game on Tuesday. And look, there are signs that he is trending in that direction. I think there's no question Tatum will, at a bare minimum, compete for a scoring championship before his career is over, maybe multiple scoring championships. This year, he averaged a career high 26 plus points per game. And you can see the evolution of his game just in the game he played on Tuesday night. I mean, he went to the free throw line 17 times. That's been a source of growth for Jayson Tatum over the last couple of years. He averaged more than 5 free throw attempts per game this season. The great players like Kobe, they got to the free throw line a lot and were able to get easy buckets that way. So as that part of Tatum's game evolves, so will his chances to win these awards. Another aspect of this is defense. I mean, Tatum has become a much better defensive player over the last 2 seasons. He has all the physical tools to be a great defensive player. He's got quick feet. He's got a long wingspan. He's got good instincts, but he's really started to put them together over the last couple of years. So all those things combined make me believe that Tatum, who's only 23 right now, has high potential to be an MVP before his career is over.
The reward, of course, for a performance like that is now a meeting with the Brooklyn Nets. And Brad Stevens was quoted after this most recent game as saying that that's probably the most talented team that's been assembled in his tenure in the NBA. Do the Celtics have a chance here at all? I know that you wrote that this could potentially be something of a bloodbath. I mean, what do they need to do if they do have a shot?
Yeah, it's hard to see a path to victory for Boston here, especially with Jaylen Brown out of the lineup. The Nets have just 3 absolute snipers in Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden, 3 of the best fourth quarter scorers in the NBA today. So they are going to be able to execute savagely at the end of these games. And Boston, without Jaylen Brown in the lineup, is going to have a real hard time matching up defensively. The Celtics have 2 fairly subpar defenders in their starting lineup in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Marcus Smart's great, but he can only guard one guy at one time. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on that team to come up with good defensive schemes team-wise to get some stops. I think the Celtics' really only chance to beat Brooklyn is try to outscore them. And, the Nets have had that problem in the past. Their defense was only ranked 23rd in the NBA this season. They've lost to some bad teams, in part because those bad teams have put big numbers on them. So, if the Celtics can get the Nets into a shootout and win some of those games, maybe there's a chance, but this is a series the Nets will be heavily favored to win, and it will be justifiable.
Before we move on to the West, just a quick thoughts on Pacers-Wizards here and potentially something of a redemption story for Russell Westbrook, at least in the postseason anyway. Is that the narrative heading into that particular matchup?
Yeah, Russell Westbrook was one of the best players in the NBA over the final month of the regular season. He had a triple-double in 19 of his last 23 games. He was really the engine that drove the Wizards into this playoff position. But against the Celtics in the first play-in game, he submitted an absolute clunker. It's not a stretch to say that Russell Westbrook's awful performance was the reason that Washington lost that game. And Westbrook has had his critics about his playoff performances, the low percentage shooting, some of the series he lost while he was in Oklahoma City. So there's a lot on the line, I think, for Russell Westbrook. This Pacers team is very good. They've got a very big front court. They've got a very solid point guard in Malcolm Brogdon. But Westbrook is going to have to shoot a high percentage. He's going to have to, move the ball around, get a double-digit assist in this game. He's going to have to play like the guy we saw in the regular season, or else the Wizards, they could bow out, and then it could be a long offseason for Russell Westbrook.
All right, when you take a look at what's going on out west with the play-in tournament, you have what the NBA, I imagine, thinks is a dream meeting between the Lakers and the Warriors. What kind of shape are the Lakers in right now as they head into the playoffs and hopefully try to make something happen?
You're right. The NBA couldn't have scripted this any better to have their play-in tournament include a game between the Lakers and the Warriors, two marquee teams with marquee players. The Lakers are in pretty good shape going to the playoffs. It's been a rough couple of months for them with injuries to Anthony Davis, LeBron James. Dennis Schroeder went out in health and safety protocols, but they've got all those guys back, and they're as close to 100% as they are going to be. Now, there are some lingering chemistry issues that you have to look at. Andre Drummond was signed in early March, or early April rather. He hasn't had a lot of time to play alongside LeBron and AD. Marc Gasol is still trying to figure out his role with this team with Drummond around. Schroeder recently came back from that COVID-related issue, so he's still worked himself into shape. So there's the potential for some ugly moments during this game for the Lakers, but this is a Western Conference worst nightmare. The Lakers being healthy going into the postseason. Look, we saw the Clippers against Oklahoma City in the last game of the regular season intentionally lose. It is hard to intentionally lose a game to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Oklahoma City Thunder have been trying to lose like every game since mid-March, and the Clippers went into Oklahoma City and lost to them. Now, why did they do that? So they could potentially avoid the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs. So that tells you the respect that the Lakers have amongst their Western Conference peers. So I think the Lakers certainly are not infallible in this postseason, but right now this is the best script you could have hoped for if you're a Laker fan, to have this team be in the condition it's in going into the postseason.
Chris, now that the play-in tournament is finally here, we heard all the skeptics talk about it before it began. I mean, your overall impressions here after an impressive performance from the Celtics and also some really fun matchups potentially over the next night.
Yeah, I think the play-in games themselves are great. Pacers Hornets wasn't a great game. Celtics Wizards turned into not a great game, but it doesn't matter. I think the play-in tournament itself is the best innovation the NBA's had since they removed hand checking from the game in the early 2000s as a way to increase scoring, which would increase interest in the league. The play-in tournament has not eliminated tanking altogether, but it has significantly reduced tanking by having so many teams just feel like if they can just get within shouting distance of that number 10 seed, it'll give them a chance to make the playoffs, and it gives them the opportunity to keep playing hard. I had this conversation with Scott Brooks on Monday, and the Wizards, they made a strong run at the end of the season. They were dead in the water back in late January, early February, and they closed the season really strong. And Scott said that the play-in tournament was a big reason for that. They didn't have to fight their way all the way to the 8th seed, though they did eventually get there. All they had to do was look at that number 10 seed, and you could tell players in that locker room, look, the mountain isn't that high. We just have to climb our way to that number 10 seed, and we put ourselves in position to get into the playoffs. That is an unequivocal success for the NBA. The play-in tournament, while it may be tweaked moving forward, maybe it doesn't include the 7 seed next season, maybe it's just 8, 9, 10 next season. Regardless, the play-in tournament, I think, has been a success, and it is here to stay in the NBA.
All right, Chris Mannix of Sports Illustrated. If you haven't listened to his recent podcast with Scott Brooks or Reb, he's writing on SI.com, make sure to check it out. He'll be covering everything throughout the course of the rest of the play-in tournament and the playoffs. Thanks for being with us.
You got it.